Colin O'Keefe here again for LXBN TV. With the season set to start this weekend, the MLS narrowly avoided a strike by reaching a collective bargaining agreement late Wednesday evening. Joining me to discuss the deal and what it means for the league going forward is attorney Cary Burke. He's with McKenna Long Aldridge and author on the firm's blog, Labor Relations Today. Cary, first off, what are the biggest points of the new CBA between the MLS players and the teams? What were the big sticking points for each side here?
Well, Colin, first of all, thanks for having me. And you're right, the league narrowly avoided a labor strike, which would have been the start of its 20th labor season. So this is a big deal here. There are really four key issues that the league and the players had to negotiate to get to this agreement in principle. The first of which is free agency. Prior to this current agreement in principle, there was absolutely no free agency to speak of whatsoever. Players whose agreements with their team had expired would go into basically a rookie draft, but for veterans. So they had no control over where they were going once their agreement with their team expired. The second major issue was minimum salary. Players on the minimum salary were receiving about $35,000 a year, which to us and compared to the other four sports leagues is certainly a pittance. Now, they've moved up to about $60,000 a year, which I would say is a huge win for the players. The third major issue is the salary cap. And this is probably the biggest win for the owners apart from kicking free agency down the road, in that the free agency cap, or the salary cap, is set at about $500,000 more this year than it was last year. And lastly, the agreement, the owners wanted it to be about 8 years and the players won, and now it's about 5 years. So that's where we're at right now with the agreement as far as what we know.
I see. And then, of course, as you mentioned, just a 5-year deal. And then, of course, you said kicking free agency down the road a little bit. So, again, with this being, again, just that shorter 5-year deal, this is going to come up again sooner than people realize. So what are the issues that could potentially present some kind of trouble in the future? What does this deal mean for the short and long-term future of the league?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And as I said, the players really achieved what I would like to call free agency light. But prior to this deal, they had no free agency to speak of whatsoever. And now they're only eligible for free agency if they meet two conditions. The first of which is they have to be 28 years old. And the second of which is far more onerous, is that they have to be in the league for 8 years. Right. And even if they are eligible for free agency, which by my count is about 21 players meet these current requirements out of about the 500 that are in the MLS system, they are only subject to a salary cap increase. And by that, I mean, for example, if a player is making $200,000, even if they move to a new team in quote unquote free agency, they'll only be eligible for a 15% raise maximum. And the biggest deal here is the owners, like I said, have kicked this down the road. No major sports league has achieved free agency without a labor strike. And I think that that's not outside the realm of possibilities in 5 years. Quite frankly, we've heard that players are fairly upset about this deal. They think that their player reps really capitulated at the 11th hour just to get the season going. And I think that the next crop of players negotiating this deal will really push harder for something much closer to true free agency.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to watch. I mean, people look at the MLS as kind of almost a progressive, future-driven league. But then again, at the same time, you look at salaries, you look at the labor issues. They're still in their infancy. It's been around, as you mentioned, for 20 years. But compared to the other major sports, still very much in its infancy. So they're dealing with a lot of the issues for leagues that they have to deal with early on in that process. And one of those big ones is free agency, which we'll have to see how they tackle that in the next labor negotiations. Because again, those aren't that far off. Once again, that was Cary Burke of McKenna Long Aldridge. For more of his insight on the developments here, be sure to visit laborrelationstoday.com. Thank you for joining me today, Cary.
Thanks, Colin. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.